Upfront and Outspoken with Bob Williams. If you love the Constitution,
man is not free unless government is limited.
If you love freedom,
as government expands, liberty contracts.
If you believe in personal responsibility, if you believe America is still the greatest nation on earth, then get ready for an experience you'll never forget. This is Upfront and Outspoken. Here's your host, Bob Williams.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag, ooh, they're red, white, and blue.
And welcome back. This is Friday. This, of course, is Upfront Outspoken. I'm your host, Bob Williams, and I'm tongue-tied. What can I tell you? This is Friday, TGIF. Time for me to think about getting the hell out of here is what a time it really is. But before I do, I have a guest. Yes, author, activist. Jonathan Wolfman is my guest, and we're going to be talking about Witness 40 in the Ferguson situation. Plus, we're going to be talking about something we didn't discuss yesterday. Welcome back to the show, Jonathan. As always, glad to have you.
Thank you very, very much, Bob. Hello to everybody out there from a cold and very overcast Washington, D.C.
Well, we got pretty much the same thing down here. But, Jonathan, I want to bring you on. You know, I only want to spend a few minutes on this. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to hear the news reports and all this coming out regarding Witness 40 in the Ferguson grand jury. And I kind of want to get your impressions on this, and then I got a couple of other questions I want to ask.
Well, I have heard some, and it does seem to me that if Witness 40 is, as is being said, a veteran racist, the fact that with extraordinary history of a very nasty racial animus and statements here and there, and quite happy to admit that, yeah, she's a racist. She seems to have admitted that in a number of public and semi-public venues. Then you do really wonder what the prosecution in Ferguson was thinking. And you see, here's what it raises for me, Bob, and I wonder if it raises this for all of you out there. You know, locals always say, federal government, stay off our backs, leave us alone. Why does Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, why does he come here? Why does he want to get into this? Why does the president feel so necessary to get into this? Well, you know, here's my answer to that. If, in fact, local prosecutors do their damned job and do it right, there's usually very little reason for the federal government to say, ho, hold on, wait a minute. But if, in fact, local prosecutors act in ways that seem to push the potential for prosecution in a very particular direction, by, in this case, apparently serving up a potential witness who clearly was making stuff up based on her, racial feelings, that invites the federal government in. Don't people realize that?
You know, the thing is, too, is with this Witness 20, we found out that not only was she a convicted felon, she's had psychiatric issues. Her credibility, even came under scrutiny when federal investigators talked to him, when the prosecuting attorney up in Ferguson talked to her, and yet they brought this woman onto the grand jury stage, shall we say. I don't know what the hell their thoughts were up there, but it calls into question then, if such an individual is allowed to testify, who is not only, like you said, a racist, she has psychiatric issues, she's been a convicted felon, she's been associated with other incidences, it calls into question the entire grand jury system when you have officer-related shootings.
Certainly it does. And, I think it would be important to point this out to our our wonderful audience. You know, guys, when you're on a grand jury, you really rely on the expertise of the prosecuting attorney. You have to. You're not a lawyer. Your lawyers typically are not on grand juries. You're ordinary citizens, good, bright, reasonably well educated people, ordinary folks. Of course you have to rely on the integrity and decency and brains of the prosecutor. If it turns out that the prosecutor is in effect tilting the pinball machine in a specific direction with this kind of tainted witness, how is that grand jury, how are those grand jury members to know? They see the prosecutor giving up this witness, and so they have to assume that the witness is credible, and yet we find out later that she's tainted in all these ways Bob has mentioned. It doesn't so much throw, in my mind, into question the whole grand jury system. It throws into, again, the notion that local prosecutors who don't want the federal government coming in and second guessing what they do, they've got to do it straight.
Exactly. And it is going to create controversy over the next several months, because now people are calling that a new grand jury should be impaneled. This particular witness, just basically, forget her. And there's calls that she faces potential perjury charges, obstruction of justice, and countless other charges. But that's to be seen down the road here. And but I want to devote, most of our time today, Jonathan, to, yesterday we had a very good ongoing conversation in which Arjuna was a part of, and we were talking about the thawing of the Cuban-American relations, since the release of Alan Gross. And I want to air for our listeners something that came out, excuse me, yesterday. Wow, I got a frog in my throat, I think, or a butterfly or something. But anyhow, Colin Powell was speaking on the news last night, and I want our listeners to hear it, and then I'm going to get your comments. Everybody, give a listen.
George W. Bush supported the economic embargo on Cuba. So did the Secretary of State during his first term, Colin Powell, the retired Army general, is with us from Washington. Secretary Powell, good morning.
Good morning. How are you all?
You're a veteran of diplomacy. Do you totally support what the president has done, the steps he has taken and plans to take, and the deal he has made?
Yes, I support it, but there's a long road that has to be traveled. I had a flashback when I heard the announcement yesterday, a flashback to October of 1962 when I was a young infantry captain on my way to Vietnam, and suddenly we got instructions, no, you may be going to an armored division in Fort Hood because we're going to invade Cuba. Well, that didn't happen, but over the last 50 years I have watched this policy unfold, and I have been a part of it. And as Secretary of State, as you noted, I supported it and even strengthened the sanctions against Cuba. But I think it's time now to turn that page of history. I don't see anything wrong with opening diplomatic relations with Cuba. We have diplomatic relations with other nations just as oppressive as Cuba. It's a way to talk. It's a way to make your point. They're not going to get off the sanctions list anytime soon. Congress isn't going to do that. But it's good to have an ambassador there who could tell the Cubans, this is what comes if you start to respond in a positive way. So I think it's a way of opening a channel of communications, a door that has not been there before. And as Scott Pelley just noted, there is optimism within the Cuban people by this change, and therefore I think let's start it, let's get the process going, but let's not have any illusions. This is still a terrible regime. We don't support their form of government. We don't like what they're doing, but I think having diplomatic relations as we have had with the Soviet Union, with Vietnam, and so many other places, we can produce positive change.
So you're recommending to the Congress that they lift the embargo?
No, I am recommending to the Congress they take it under advisement, monitor what the Cubans are doing, and if they reach a point where they think that sufficient progress has been made, then Congress could consider it. But this is just the beginning. We're not lifting the sanctions yet, and there's a lot of pressure that will remain on the Castro brothers. and should remain on them until they start to show the kind of positive movement that we want to see. Releasing political prisoners, opening up the economy, making life easier and more open for the Cuban people. And so this is just one step, and there are a lot of steps that have to be made to make this work.
General, can you address the criticism that President Obama, by taking this action, has vindicated the brutal behavior of the Cuban government, a Castro government that has been so oppressive, a long list of human rights abuses?
No, I don't think he's done that at all, and nor is that necessarily the case just because you've opened an embassy and start to make some movements. I hope that our government will continue to speak out against that kind of behavior, and I hope our ambassador going in will make sure that we give this message to them at every opportunity. We've gone through the same thing with a lot of other countries, and my experience in all of this is once you start talking to someone, you're almost inserting a poison pill into the system where they have to start responding to the pressures that they are still under. And so I think this is a positive step, and let's not overemphasize all that's going to happen in the months and years ahead. It's a long process, but I think a page of history has been turned, and it's appropriate to do so at this time.
All right, and those were comments made by former Secretary of State Colin Powell early this morning, very early this morning, and I got to, once again, I'm going to be bringing Jonathan in here because I kind of want to get his impressions first about what Colin Powell said.
Well, first of all, Bob, I agree with Powell. It's a good move. It's a good move, and it will tend to the good. You know, we live in a time where if we don't have instant gratification, everybody says, oh no, this was obviously a terrible idea because they're not running free and open elections in a day and a half. I mean, that's just silly talk. That really is just silly talk. And that's why, frankly, I'm impressed with the one Republican who has gotten up in the last few days, Rand Paul, and has agreed. Now, I don't agree with Rand Paul simply because he's agreed with our current president. I agree with Rand Paul because he seems to have a measured outlook on these kinds of things. And I agree with Colin Powell that the embargo isn't going to be lifted any minute soon, but you need to begin to engage. You need to begin to have back and forth. And, you know, since we've lifted some restrictions, the small businesses in Cuba have begun to flourish. There are tens of thousands of them since President Obama began to lift some of the trade and money restrictions. It's a good thing. It brings them into the real world. And frankly, anytime soon that I can get some Cuban cigars, I'm all for it.
You know, a lot of things have come out since the thawing, shall we say, the thawing of relations between Cuba and the United States. And one of them that came up just recently is even though there is this ongoing thaw, there are 80 people in Cuba, 80 fugitives, and I'm going to put it that way, 80 fugitives in Cuba who are wanted here in the United States, including, and I want to get this story correct, and I want to get her name out there correctly, Ashada Shakur. She is the step aunt of the deceased rapper Tupac Shakur, and according to the report that we've got, she herself was convicted, I'm going to get this right, was convicted of killing a New Jersey state trooper on May 2nd, 1973. She's now 67 years old. She escaped from a New Jersey prison in a made-for-movie fashion in 1979 and found her way to Cuba, and she was granted asylum under Fidel Castro in 1984. Now, the story goes on, it says, if Cuba really wants to warm relations, the thinking goes, they should extradite Shakur a member of the Black Panthers and Black Liberation Army who last year was named a most wanted terrorist by the FBI. She's also the first woman to ever make that esteemed list. The White House referred request for comment on the matter back to the National Security Council. And it seems that lawmakers in New Jersey want her to come back because she has a bounty of about $2 million on her head. And everybody there, indeed wants her back. So the question is, there are 80 people, including Shakur, who skipped to Cuba. Now, the thawing of relations will these 80 people potentially come to the limelight? In your opinion, will Cuba turn these 80 people over to us, or because, in this particular case, she was granted asylum and these other 79 have been living pretty much on the lam there, are they just going to turn a blind eye? I mean, what do you think?
I think this. I think that eventually, if our State Department requests that Ms. Shakur and the others be returned, given the fact that they appear to have been given fair trials. I mean, just a few moments ago we were talking about legal procedures in Ferguson that did not seem straightforward and fair. There's no reason that I know of to think that the trial in which Shakur was convicted was unfair. If these people were in fact convicted by fair and free and open juries, then in my opinion, she should be returned. Open relations means just that. It means that anything done based on the old way of thinking ought to be seriously reviewed and probably countermanded. If this woman, if our government and the New Jersey state government wants her back to complete her life sentence for murder, yeah, I think she should be sent back, and the 79 others. Certainly, having been a fugitive and having been taken in by the Castro brothers certainly does not trump a fair and open New Jersey court.
There are already people getting on the bandwagon and saying that the incident regarding Shakur was a stacked deck against her. We've been hearing that all along. No matter what kind of a trial we're having, it seems that not only is race brought up, but it's a stacked jury, it's this, that, and the other thing. But that's kind of immaterial. I mean, she indeed was convicted, first-degree murder, and she fled. She broke out of prison. But the question I'm going to raise to you and to our listening audience is: Does this, just because you may not have agreed with your sentence, number one, do you break out of jail? Number two, do you flee to a communist country? And then now that there's a thawing in relations, my question would be, as Raul Castro, the president of that country, it must be weighing on him to decide, do I revoke the asylum we gave to these people and repatriate them back to the United States in order to continue forward, or do I say, okay, I did what I promised you up front. These 80 we're not going to touch. You're going to leave them alone.
Well, I mean, my guess is that he's not going to act on this unless that is President Castro probably has no incentive to act on this absent a formal request from the United States Attorney General's office. But I'm betting, I would just bet, I could be wrong, but I just bet, guys out there, that if our Attorney General's office, whether it's under President Obama or the next president, whoever that may be, makes a formal request, my guess is the Castro brothers are going to take that very, very seriously and realize that those 80 people probably did very bad things, and maybe they would love to get them off their hands.
You know, you did bring up a very interesting thing when you mentioned about the politics. Stephen Vladeck, I want to get his last name, Vladeck, who is an expert on the national security law at American University College of Law, stated, you know, so much of extradition law is just politics. The real question is whether the Cuban government decides it's in its interest to cooperate with New Jersey through the Justice Department. And indeed, this is going to be in light of what is going on. It is going to be sort of a hot potato because, you know, we're going to want to get extradition law treaty signed with Cuba. You know, may not happen. There's so much going on here, even though, according to a recent poll, 56% of everybody wants a dialogue, wants to open up, you know, with Cuba to basically erase this embargo. And what we aren't seeing is hotspots like this, like the downing in 1996 of that rescue flight. You know, other what people would call atrocities that Cuba has come. These, you know, these are going to be issues that are going to be coming up in order to get this basically on a level playing field. And I kind of want to get your intake onto how are we going to not only work these issues in, but yet build on a ongoing, I don't want to say emphasis, but on an ongoing relationship with Cuba. How do we go about this?
Well, I honestly think that so much will depend on the goodwill or lack of it, but hopefully the goodwill that's created as we have more and more business contacts. I think if the opening to Cuba creates a more vibrant Cuban economy, the Castro brothers and the others in the top echelons of their government are going to see that, in fact, there is real benefit to cooperating with the United States. And that means, of course, that we don't want American corporations going in there the way they did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s of the last century and simply exploiting the living hell out of the ordinary poor workers. We don't want that. But if, in fact, our government can help facilitate a positive business enterprise in Cuba such that they feel increasingly smart for having made this move, then I think these other or ancillary issues that you bring up, and I think it's very good that you brought these kinds of things up, I think New Jersey is going to be eventually satisfied if in fact these larger issues begin to show the Cubans that, you know, cooperation with us actually makes a positive difference.
You know, one thing I do want to bring up that I don't know if you were aware of, Jonathan, but you know, the United States does have an extradition treaty with Cuba since 1904, but it didn't, you know, it hasn't enforced it during the Castro regime. And a clause in this treaty says a fugitive criminal shall not be surrendered if the offense in respect of which his surrender is demanded be one of a political character. So it's going to make me wonder if this indeed is going to be classified as a political character, or what, because she was affiliated with the Black Panthers, the Black Liberation Army. You know, is she going to be classified as, you know, seeking asylum on that basis? You know, it's going to make us wonder. And Stephen said also, he said, so much of the extra, like I said, that these laws are politics, and, I have to wonder if he's right in that the Cuban government is going to decide if its interest to cooperate with New Jersey is best suited. I don't know. To be honest with you, there's going to be a lot of issues coming up here that, we're going to hear about, and all the dirty laundry is going to come out.
I agree with you entirely. I don't think we can even begin to list out all of these issues. And, that I did not know about that clause in the extradition treaty, but clearly there'll be lawyers who will love to have publicity for themselves, arguing that it was a political trial, on and on and on. And obviously that's going to take time. But if in fact the preponderance of the evidence is such that she was convicted in a fair way, I'm betting that over time the leadership in Havana is going to say, well, if the United States really wants her back, let's get her back.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. It remains to be seen. But like I said, there are so many issues that still are unresolved, and you already have people like Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz. They're already jumping on the bandwagon. This was no good. President Obama was the worst negotiator since FDR. In fact, probably since Teddy Roosevelt, if they had their way. But in the recent years, he's been listed as the worst negotiator ever. And I'm wondering if all of this, I don't want to say dirty laundry, but all of these skeletons we're going to start hearing about when we have the Senate subcommittees come out, when we have a potential ambassadorship for Cuba, the opening, the funding. All this is going to come out, but yet we're not hearing a bit about this in mainstream.
Oh yeah, I know, and the mainstream just wants headlines, but you're right. All of this is going to come out. I think that the three Republican potential presidential candidates that you've mentioned, of the three, I think Jeb Bush is bright enough to know that he has to come out initially condemning it, and then a year from now he's going to see that he's going to soften that. The other two won't soften it, but Cruz and Rubio, they won't soften their positions on this. They're totally ensconced and tied to and tethered to 1950s, 1960s anti-communist ideology. And it's not that communism is anybody's, let's write home to mother and say, I have found the truth. That's communism should not be that for anybody, communism in practice. But the fact is the world has changed. And if we can, in fact, take the reins of this change, I was talking with a friend the other night, and he even there's some humor in this. He said to me, the hidden benefit of the Cuba USA opening is that Ricky Ricardo will be booked indefinitely. And, in all seriousness, though, I do think that as I said to you on the program yesterday, the Northeast establishment Republican Party, it's not that they're not going to want to get into these ancillary issues, but unlike the Tea Party faction of the Republican Party, it seems to me that the old established, especially Northeastern Republican Party, with a lot of money, they're going to want to gain the benefit of the business end of this decision, and I think that's going to hold a lot of sway.
We also brought up yesterday when you were talking about the GOP here, you were kind of doing, hitting the trim of it, but we brought it up yesterday that the hardliners regarding the keeping the embargo, none of this should be going through, and all of that are dependent on the older generation in Miami, in the United States, that left Cuba for one reason or another, because it was a dictatorship or they were, whatever their civil rights issues were, that they left Cuba. They're focusing on that growing minority, because you know as well as I do, Jonathan, that people our age, we're not going to be around forever, and the younger generation want to, get ties with Cuba, because that's their native land, and makes me wonder.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, imagine, I was thinking about this after we had our really good conversation on the air yesterday. I was thinking about this. Imagine you're a young entrepreneur in Miami of Cuban descent. What happened 2 days ago, isn't it making you think, if you're a young man, young woman, an entrepreneur, wouldn't it be great for me to establish my business on the island with some relatives of mine, with some old family friends? That's what's going to push. And that's what's going to push the hard line on the Tea Party far right. They're going to be out of the conversation eventually, because these young to semi-young Miamians, if you will, they're going to say to themselves, yeah, I know Grandpa hated the Castros, and probably for good reason. Grandpa, I love you, but this presents opportunity for me and my friends here in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale. We are going to make this work. I love you, Grandpa, but now is now. Right,
exactly, and this is what I'm saying. The GOP has a tendency to stay a hard line, not looking. They're so narrow vision, they're so tunnel vision. They're not looking to their sides, where this is going to open up a lot to the American economy, in a sense, because we're going to be able to create an industry coming out of Cuba, and I'm waiting for the day I can get a case of Cuban cigars. But
me too, man.
But that's not all. I mean, that's not all that's going to come out of Cuba. We've heard reports that within Cuba, small businesses are starting regarding for computer repair, for other things. Granted, they still have to answer to the Castro regime, but this is going to create an influx for them. And we're also hearing that there is also going to potential repercussions against Venezuela, because Venezuela has supplied Cuba with oil. This also opens up the market for our oil to get into Cuba. So, this has more ramifications.
You are so right, and I think the far right of the Republican Party is so. You said tunnel visioned, and you're so right, because look. If, in fact, our allies or ourselves can supply oil to the island, look what it's going to do to marginalize Russia even more. Look what it's going to do to marginalize Venezuela even more. And the fact that we are going to be bringing to this meeting of the Americas in a few weeks ordinary Cubans and Cuban leaders to the table, that's going to send a message to, if there are any hardline anti-American regimes left in South America, yeah, and there are, especially, you're right, Venezuela, they obviously are going to have to reassess now.
I agree.
And I just don't understand the Republicans who don't realize what a coup this is for the United States.
Yeah, I agree 100%, because this is going to help not only our economy, it's going to help the Cuban economy, but then there's another aspect that we tried to bring into the conversation yesterday, but evidently I was a very poor host yesterday and I didn't really get my point across, is that since Cuba became a dictatorship, a communistic dictatorship, they have always been aligned with Russia. The old Iron Curtain Russia, and they still have ties to Russia and Putin and all of this. Plus, they have ties with North Korea. So, by now allowing the United States to not only open an embassy in Cuba, right on Cuban soil, but to allow businesses and banks to do business on Cuba. If I was Kim Jong-un and I was Vladimir Putin, I'd be sitting there going, oh my God, what the hell are we going to do?
That's absolutely right. The far right will never, we know this, they will never give this current president any props at all. If he breathes, they'll claim that he's getting something extra out of the oxygen that we're not. But the fact is, look what Obama has done in terms of Russia in the past 6 months. He has checkmated him without our losing one soldier on the ground, which is what the far right always wants us to do, lose soldiers on the ground and then go to grave sites and pray over it and say how glorious we are. But look what Obama's done. What he's done is he's avoided dead American kids, and he has checkmated Putin in the Crimea, in that area of the world, and now he's checkmated him in the Americas. The one outpost that guy had here in the Americas, well, guess what? Bye-bye Vladimir.
I have to say that you brought up a very interesting point in regarding to checkmating Vladimir Putin. People have always condemned. And I'm going to say this. I've heard it on the streets. I've heard it elsewhere. People are condemning President Obama's foreign policy. They're saying he doesn't have a foreign policy. He doesn't stay to his guns when he needs to. With what's going on in Iraq regarding ISIS and all this. But yet, because he won't put boots on the ground per se, and the thing that really is disturbing to me, and there's times I'm very, very critical of President Obama, and I'm not going to say I'm not, but they're not looking at the overall picture. They're focusing on a very specific thing that has gone on, and I agree with you that what is going on the global scene, President Obama does indeed have a foreign policy. He is learning it is better for diplomatic relations than it is for boots on the ground.
It's such an easy out to say, well, these guys are our enemies. Let's put boots on the ground and have these glorious funerals for all these American boys and girls.
My question
That's
there,
old. That's really old.
Yeah, my question there is, who wants to see caskets? Who wants to see an airplane land with bodies?
You know who wants to see caskets? Guys our age, in our early 60s and older, who think in a very, very narrow way. They don't see winning in any other terms other than shoot-'em-up terms. And that's unfortunate because, in fact, we're winning. Think about it, guys out there. Think about it, audience. Putin... I used this crude expression yesterday. That man is pissing down his leg. He is so upset right now with what we've done to his economy, what we've done to his expansionist dream. He obviously, if he had taken over the Crimea, he would have gone back into other areas, but we stopped him. We checkmated him. And now he can't make a move on that chessboard in South and Central America and in the Caribbean. People in America don't understand that foreign policy, when it's done right, is so much more subtle. I get it that Americans don't really, they don't really love subtlety, but you know what? Sometimes it wins, and I think we're winning.
Yeah, I think we are in this instance. So, for all the detractors out there that's saying, oh, he does not have any type of foreign policy, you're right. You have to look at the fact that, granted, there are going to be people out there that say, well, we should have did more in Iran, or not Iran, but Iraq. There's got to be more that we can do about Iran and their buildup of nuclear capabilities. There's got to be more that we can do. what we fail to understand, and I'm going to, throw this out there, is what we fail to understand is there is so much going on behind the scenes that we're not going to hear about until a breakthrough comes in, such as what happened here in Cuba. How do we not know that a similar negotiations are going on with Iran? How do we not know that similar negotiations are going on, elsewhere?
That's absolutely right. I mean, I'm really sort of stunned at my fellow Americans sometimes. Here we have on May 1, 2011, Sunday evening, Obama, people have been watching baseball games all day, and he gets on TV at 11 o'clock at night, and he says, guess what? Osama bin Laden is dead. That was a stunning moment. What should he have done? Been telling us all along what each step of the way he was doing? I don't understand Americans who don't realize that acting this way is in our interest. Of course it's in our interest.
Yeah, that's the thing. When President Obama came on and announced the killing, I should say the decimation of Osama bin Laden, America cheered. I mean, America cheered. Here, we got him. We got him. After so many years, we got him. And they cheered what he had done. But look how long it took to get him. But we're not hearing the same cheering, regarding, Cuba, regarding else. Everybody is so quick to forget, Osama bin Laden. Now they are so willing to condemn what he did here in Cuba.
Well, what's interesting about it is that you have two Republican senators who by no means can be confused with liberals. That is Jeff Flake of Arizona and Rand Paul of Kentucky. And they have come out and said, you know what? This is a shrewd move on the president's part. No, would we vote for Obama? No, we would not vote for Obama. Do we like a lot of what he's done? No, we don't like a lot of what he's done. But these are two men, Republicans, pretty darn conservative Republicans, who have an independent spirit and who don't mind looking at each issue. I got to tell you, Rand Paul and Jeff Flake, they are impressive individuals precisely because, not because they agree with me on this, guys out there. I'm not praising them because they happen to agree with me. I'm praising the two Republicans, Paul and Flake, because they don't get scared of the rest of their political party who want to live in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. They want to make independent judgments, and they do so loudly and publicly, and they should be praised for it.
And they're going to be, as well as I do, they're going to be condemned for doing that. I mean,
of course they are.
That's just going to be part of the course. But we've got only a few minutes left here, and the thing that I am most interested in is the political ramifications up on Capitol Hill, starting in January, because anybody that President Obama puts to the Senate as a possible ambassador to Cuba is going to be, he's going to be grilled and every bit of our dirty, any dirty laundry that Cuba brought up is going to be there. And it's going to make me wonder: does President Obama stand a ghost chance in hell of ever getting an ambassador down there?
Well, it's a great question, but I think that if Obama is half as shrewd as I've been arguing that he is, what he will do is he will appoint for potential ambassador to Havana a fairly conservative but open-minded individual who has a track record of real skepticism of, and maybe even a Republican. When Obama appointed and I'm blocking his name, but governor of Utah to be our ambassador. He ran for president, didn't get anywhere several years ago. John Huntsman, when he appointed the Republican John Huntsman to be our ambassador to China. He made a shrewd move, and I'm wondering if he's thinking of making another fairly shrewd move in appointing a Republican that would be very hard for the Republicans in Congress not to take a vote on. I think it would be frankly smart, because I think if Obama is as clever as I think he might be, is he'll realize that just getting virtually any ambassador in there, I mean obviously qualified, I don't mean just Tom, Dick, and Harry off the street, of course, but any qualified guy, it doesn't matter if the first one isn't a Democrat. So what? So what? It doesn't matter if the first ambassador under the new system that we've established now with Cuba, it doesn't matter if our first ambassador to Havana completely agrees with the president on everything. It should be somebody who can bring people together and say, let's make this work. And I'm betting there's a 50-50 chance that he's going to appoint a Republican and see what the Republican Senate does with that.
It would be interesting indeed if he said, okay, I have this individual, and guess what? He's Republican, and it's going to be very interesting in the next, couple of years as to what develops. But, here's the other question I have for you, is with the people on Capitol Hill, and I hate to refer it to that way because our Congress has been one of inactivity, but given that the Republicans are indeed going to be in control of both the House and the Senate, do you see that anything regarding Cuba is going to be not only scrutinized, but they're going to do everything they can to defund anything that might even have a hint of Cuba?
Yeah, they might. They might. Not if they have a Republican ambassador over there. They will be less inclined to do that. But certainly, as Colin Powell was saying at the top of our show, the embargo is not going to be lifted anytime soon, and it certainly won't be lifted by this Republican Congress. But that's okay. What you have to do is make a start. That's what I'm going to argue. You have to make a start and see where it goes with an open mind.
The other thing that we're going to be hearing, and we got about 2 minutes left here, is we've heard, sound bites over the last couple of days that when President Obama was Senator Obama, he had already tried to, put in a request, say, hey, look, we got to relook at our embargo. And then when he became President Obama, or candidate Obama, I should say, he said, look, we're going to keep the embargo intact. And then now, with this sudden reversal, opening up a embassy, opening up, diplomatic, situation in Cuba, we're going to hear people say, well, he's like everybody else. He flip-flops, blah, 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 you can bet the Republicans are going to, pounce on this, but yet we're not going to hear any more than what we did 2 days ago, and I haven't heard nothing about it since.
My guess is that the Republicans are going to more or less leave that go, because there's so many instances of every politician who makes it to anywhere near the top of developing their views, and I don't think the Republicans are going to think that they're going to get any money in the bank, so to speak, by revisiting that, to tell you the truth.
I agree with Jonathan. Jonathan, it's always a pleasure. I want you to stay on here with me for a minute. Everybody else, it is time for me to get out of here. Stay tuned, because coming up right after NPR News, Ed Till will be with you all the way up until 4 o'clock. Until Monday morning, 6 a.m., this is Bob Williams. Take care of yourselves.